Yep.
Paul, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really excited for this conversation on all things pole vault. But yeah, for the listeners who don't know who you are, maybe your background, you were a very, very good athlete before you became a very good coach. So maybe give us that journey and everything in between.
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually was a pole vaulter. Went to three Olympic Games. Never quite got it right at one of them, any of them. That's probably one of the things that's, as an athlete, I had some great results. I jumped 6 meters, which was a dream come true for me. I never got a medal at a major. I had some good wins, but, and I think it's probably a sign of some of the mental struggles that I might have had and the differences between great athletes and good athletes and stuff like that. But I really don't think of myself that much now as an athlete. I've really, as a coach, I feel like you have to let that go a little bit and try and commit to the coaching. I think when you start coaching, sometimes you find yourself referring to your own career, and at some point you sort of realize you just sound like a wanker. And the athletes don't really need to hear that, and you probably actually need to let go to be able to coach freely anyway, because the way you did it is usually not the same way others are doing it. You've got to find the way for each person.
And so you retired at what year did you retire?
2009. I was just it was just before my 30th birthday. I was
Okay.
29. I In some ways, do you know what I wish? I feel like I retired early, and used the excuse of injuries and stuff. Probably was just grabbing my bat and ball and leaving a little bit, and I feel like I had a lot of a big rivalry with Steve Hooker, and he was a training partner and a mate. But I essentially, in my own mind, was super jealous of him, and really, really pretty toxic. That some of the way I thought about it, and I wasn't very gracious and not a very good sport. And when I think about it now, and I've talked to him about it, thank God, and come clean with him about how I was, because at the same time I was a good mate with him. I was acting in a way that sometimes you see things in yourself that you despise in other people, and that's sort of uh, something I wish I had have just taken things on the chin a bit more, and you know handled things a bit better. But those lessons are things I try and help the athletes I'm helping now with, and hopefully they avoid some of the mistakes I made.
And what was your transition into coaching like? What kind of
Well,
period did it take before you got into that kind of side of things?
so I sort of stopped vaulting and didn't think I was an arrogant person, but essentially sort of was probably expecting to just walk into something, and be treated well and all this sort of stuff. But I got a real rude shock, and just really struggled to find my way in the real world. And I ended up really struggling with drugs. I had a big methamphetamine problem, and I think essentially I was trying to fill the hole that was left when I stopped pole vaulting, and probably trying to avoid dealing with some of my own responsibilities and some of the things I was trying to blame others for, and all that sort of thing. And probably when I came clean with myself and spoke to Steve and stuff, it was probably the beginning of me starting my recovery. Although I do think coaching as well kind of saved me in a sense. And I'm not sure I've cured my addiction, but I think I've maybe replaced it again with
Mm.
coaching. And I probably need to get to the source of that at some point. But you know, maybe I'll just keep ignoring it and push it down to my feet.
Well, at this point in your career, after what seems to be a very successful set of seasons, with Kurtis and Nina, it seems like you've found your place in the world post athlete life. And I'd love you to talk a little bit more about your journey with those two athletes and how,
Mm.
I suppose, did you begin working with elites almost immediately when you got into coaching, or how did that look
No,
from?
no, no, no. I actually came and started as just a assistant coach, coaching juniors, and And really, when I did it, it just felt like I was home. I knew what I was doing. I understood what I knew all the people involved, and felt like I belonged a little bit. And I just knew the craft because I'd done it so much. And but I was coaching kids, and I'd sort of made a decision at that point that I was going to. So it was like 5 years after I'd stopped jumping, and at that point I was at rock bottom, and basically came to the point where I was like, well, I'm just going to start coaching for free and just do the best I can and try and just do all the steps, at the bottom, like just do the time, do all the basic steps and start where you belong, not try and start, with elites and all that. And just trust that if I do really good work that it'll slowly just come to fruition and you'll get rewarded. And, I got the other head coach sort of abruptly left in 2019, and I was thrust into the acting head coach role, which was great. But at the same time, Nina and Kurtis were there then, and they were sort of the marquee athletes already, but they were, pretty injured and stuff at the time. And but they hadn't asked for me necessarily, so that was something where I felt like I couldn't come in and just command respect and tell them, "Oh, there's a new sheriff in town" or whatever. I had to walk that line between letting them walk over me and not walking all over them either, and respecting them and trying to find that balance because I sort of was the assistant coach, was the mate. That's the good guy. It's
Mm.
easy. You have to try and establish your new role. So that took a little time, and I think that took some balance and maneuvering, and I think took maybe a couple of years, and then I started to feel confident, and my results started to give me confidence that I, deserve to be there.
For those who maybe don't know much about the elite pole vaulting side, and it is very different to coaching underages, before we maybe go into the more technical stuff with those guys and their journeys, what did the interim kind of time between 2019 and when you started coaching, what did that teach you about pole vaulting? And did that kind of, I suppose, give you the insight to say that your journey as a pole vaulter can only teach you so much, or a very singular path into coaching itself?
Also, yeah, so I retired in 2009, and then I started coaching in 2014, and coaching kids again. That was something, and I had to learn the basics again almost. And I even now, like after coaching elites, I go and try and coach kids, and there's other coaches that I just think are just way ahead of me and better than me. So you need to hone that craft and keep working that skill. But at the same time, what it does, it actually reminds elite coaches that sometimes that you're getting caught in the weeds, and you need to sometimes you're you need to go back and just do the basics. And that was what I very much felt like when I think of the end of my career, when I was sort of clutching at straws and stuff. I was thinking of things that were so minute and actually so irrelevant. And now it's almost I was so far from I was so far from what pole vault, the basics of pole vault, and I got so lost in my head that it was probably going to take I was going to have a big, if I was going to start getting back in form or whatever, I would have had to have a complete sort of revolution go on in my mind and reset, because I was just getting lost in the weeds at that point. Thinking about moving your wrist like this much or whatever. When what I've learned as a coach is, and when you're teaching dynamic movements, complex skills, you just can't think that quick and
Mm.
make little choices that quick, and you basically just trying to set a groove pattern with drills, and then just one cue basically you can really give an athlete that they can actually try and achieve. I think if you give two, it gives them almost no chance of achieving either. So,
Mhm.
they say one or two is good, but I actually think one or two, but actually one.
Mm.
Mm.
Did you find, like, given that at the end of your career you were focusing on such minute details, did that make, the initial period of coaching kids kind of hard? Did you have to go back and revisit those first principles about, like, you know, if a beginner is starting
Mm.
from ground zero, like they need to actually know this before, any
Yeah.
wrist action or things come into play. Because I found myself like just going from like the NCAA system and seeing
Mm.
and listening and talking to good coaches, that when I went to then coach collegiate athletes who are very underdeveloped, that like the stuff I was thinking about, similar to what you're saying, is just not applicable, and that like the
Yeah.
order of what we're going to focus on now is so different, and in a good way, but it kind of just puts things in perspective, really, of like this is the fundamental thing, and then
Yeah.
everything else has to follow. What do
Well,
you think about
I
that type of stuff?
actually have become more and more about less is more, and I really try and just take the lessons I learned with those guys and apply it to the older guys anyway, because I think we're just overcomplicating something that you can keep. You can talk about, for instance, if you're telling someone how to do their posture, and you're saying keep your ribs in, but your shoulder blades retracted or whatever, this and that, and your head in this position. Or you could just say, just stand and be the tallest you can be,
Mm,
sort of something like you can actually kind of simplify things. Um, and you just, yeah, you can complicate things. Things are complicated. A pole vault movement is complicated, but it's, it's nowhere near as complicated as we make it out to be. And there's just a couple of fundamental things that you can focus on, and your body sort of does the rest, and your sort of body finds the sweet spots. I read a book called The Inner Game of Tennis once, and that really really resonated with me, and that was about that very thing where you're trying to um you talk about turning a light switch on or whatever. You don't stand at the right distance from the light switch and say, okay, activate my bicep, then my tricep, and my you know anterior muscles, and oh damn, I stood too far away, missed it. You just actually sort of aim for it and do it. And
mm,
so I try and use cues like that a lot more, and try and really really just coach less,
mm-hmm,
get out of the athlete's way. I think is something I've learned, and probably think a lot of coaches could you know use that mantra, because I think
mm-hmm,
it's really easy to coach people out of form. It's really hard to make an athlete better than they are. To increase their talent, but it's really easy to ruin someone by coaching them.
mm-hmm. And I
I
suppose
think,
what
yeah,
you
just,
what
just guide them to let them reach their potential, and it's almost like you just guide them a tiny bit, but you're just trying to stay out of their way otherwise.
mm. Yeah, and that's something we're probably going to get into a little bit later on the confidence
Mm.
side, and how like too much cueing can kind of affect
Oh
that. And
yeah,
I can see how that would be in pole vault for sure. But it sounds like what you're saying there is like there could be three different kind of cues that you're using. Again, you use the, movement of the head, the back, and the shoulders. But in
mm.
reality, like there's one way, or there's a way that you can say it that will get all three of those things to do what it
Yeah,
needs to do. And it's about finding that kind of nearly the fewest amount of words to get
yeah.
your idea across.
And sometimes it's like you tell them to run, and you just sometimes I'll just say run like you're running from the cops. Or just when you're jumping, when you're trying to jump something or whatever. Sometimes I just want them to resort back to instinct a little bit. They're just overthinking everything. They're trying to make all these beautiful shapes and stuff, but there's just sometimes just aim for the power.
Hmm.
Mm.
So
But
going
it doesn't
into
always work. Like, so to me, I fail with all this plenty, but I do qualify everything I say. I say, look, just humor me. Try this. If it doesn't work, I won't double down on it. You know,
mhm.
I fail a lot.
Yeah, well, it's something that I've had several guests say, in the podcast, is that they'll pretty much aim to go to the session and say nearly nothing, but they'll always fail. And that's a good kind of, I suppose, standard to hold yourself towards, because ultimately, anything other
Yeah,
than that means you're going to say even more, if you get what I'm saying.
yeah, yeah. I mean, just give yourself the permission to be wrong as well. And I think athletes can when you sort of admit things like that, and you're sort of honest with them, and you say, look, I could be wrong, and then when you are wrong, you say, yep, nah, sorry, that was my bad, that didn't work. That's another good way to get them to just know that you're not going to try and double down on everything and always seem like a guru. I can't stand guru coaches that get all mysterious because essentially they just don't know how to explain themselves, so they just try and just hide from everyone and not explain themselves to anyone.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose coaching to a degree is informed guesswork, isn't it? Really, it's not
Oh
a
yeah,
case of like you know exactly what you're
yeah.
doing for every moment that you're coaching.
No, and you can have good guesses and but to me again, you're coaching an individual athlete, and when you get studies that say, oh, the best way to do something is this, well, I really find that it doesn't matter because that's an average. You really got to work out what the athlete you're working with, what their profile is,
Hmm.
and that just comes by getting to know them and really, you know, um, like working with them and taking notice and working out what their tells are. I sort of feel like I watch once warm ups, once the athlete gets there, I really try and just watch their drills and be present because I also feel like they don't like it if you're sitting there and you're doing an email or something while they're warming up. They really feel that you're not interested, and so I
Hmm.
try and just make sure I'm present, and just watching and seeing if I can see. They do, Kurt, I can tell a mile away when something's sore or something like that. But I also know that if I bring it up with him, that he's going to get defensive, and so it's just sometimes you got to go through the song and dance
Mm.
and let it happen and be okay with that. And
Hmm.
and and that's the other thing, you sometimes have to give up on your own principles or values or beliefs in technique because being stubborn about it is actually not going to get the best result.
Mm.
Because if they're not ready, you have to try and work with what make the best of what you're working with.
Hmm. That's on that topic. Like, is there a, let's say, is there a time frame or kind of a point in the season where you'll really make a conscious decision to say, from here on out, I'm really going to not, I suppose, over govern the technical side because of, you know, what you know it does to the athlete's mindset? Because I think a
Yeah,
lot of coaches do say, look, if I go to a major championship, I want the athlete to be obviously as technically proficient as possible, but what I want more than anything else is a confident athlete. And a confident
yeah,
athlete means that I maybe have to give back or pull away from my instruction or over instruction to a
yeah,
certain point.
yeah. I do that during basically all competition season. We train for things and do drill for things, and then when you're competing, we make the best of it. Sometimes if you're not hitting the marks that we should be, okay, we've got to make the best of it. I don't get you know, too pushy with it. Really, in competition, I see your job as logistical. I don't feel like you're trying to fix their technique or make them faster at that point. And so it's almost like whatever we've got to make the best of today. And I sort of think as well that athletes have to get good at jumping and finishing bad jumps and making good results out of when they're not in good shape or when they're not jumping that well. And that's what the good athletes do. It's not
Mm,
always about just being, most being when you're really in tune and you're just absolutely firing on all cylinders. That can be rare that you're actually kind of going like that, and it might be a few times a year, but the rest of the time you can be 90, 95% and still jump really high.
mm,
And I think that's your job. You want to be consistent and jumping high all year round, and that's what I see the top guys doing is consistent. The guys jumping well all year are the guys on the dais at the end. At
mm.
the end.
Yeah, and
But
I think
but
that
yeah,
kind of allude.
I say things. When people are trying, you can see how hard they're trying to run fast. And they're poking their heads forward, and I'm just like, you're not going to create speed today. You're not going to create a meter per second of speed today. You've got to run to your speed. Don't try and run past it.
Mm.
We've got what we got, and let's make the best of it.
Yeah,
We'll
no,
do
that's
that
a
in
that's.
training. We'll do that. We'll do that in the preparation phase.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to kind of where you started with, let's say, Kurt or Nina,
Hmm.
where were they kind of good already, and what kind of changes, I suppose, did demand your attention at that point? Because yeah, two very skilled vaulters already at a
Mm,
relatively high level, and I
yeah.
suppose then where did your kind of influence start to take shape with either of them, really?
Well, I think both of them were good, and if you look at people, I think if you look at people jump when they're kids, and then you look at them jump when they're adults, you can recognize them. So people people's bodies figure out how their jump is going to work best pretty early on, and you can make minor refinements. there was a couple of things with both of them. Nina had, I feel like, one of the things, she was always dealing with a lot of injuries. And Kurtis they were both injured actually, but Kurtis had a big problem at takeoff. He would just get absolutely shredded, and sort of he was falling into takeoff, I think, and it really came down to Kurtis's running mechanics. He ran out the back a lot. And so that was that took a couple of years though, get that to, you can do work and work and work, and it just doesn't seem like it's working. And then all of a sudden you sort of notice, God, they look a lot, but they seem to look a lot better than, sort of shocks you at some point. But yeah, Nina had been, the type of training they'd been doing was heavy training, but like general training. I felt like she was really fast, but she wasn't fast when I sort of got to her. She was sort of she hadn't done any speed work. She'd been doing lots of general sort of work. And so I really got very specific with both of them. And that's what I do really. I don't try and do any training that's not going to give me a return. People talk about the 1%ers, and I'm like, well, how about we get the big bits right first, and then the 1%ers will work on if they're going to give us a return, first of all. Sometimes you're doing it, it's not giving you anything back, and you're just making them tired. So, yeah, it was one of the programming tips or mantras that I had, was I'd look at everything in the session. I had to know what the purpose was. I found that there's a lot of things you do just going through the motions, and a lot of things you do that don't do much at all and just make you tired. So really it was quality over quantity. Moved from 2 sessions a day to 1 session a day, and just hybrid sessions, because I felt like, again, I remember when I used to do 2 sessions a day, that second session was harrowing. You'd come and you'd take an hour and a half to warm up, get your body going again. Whereas if you train in the morning, you're sort of training and you're already warm, you just got to add something onto the end of the session. It's a couple of benefits. I mean, I think your body handles it better, you get a bit more, recovery for the next day or whatever, but also it allows them to have a freer day too. And then they sort of get to manage their lives a bit better. Their lives are a bit more pleasant, when they can train in the morning and then have the rest of the day, go see friends or go have coffee or whatever. And I really felt that was important. I felt happiness and sort of like enjoying training and not just seeing it as an absolute burden. Was something I thought, to me, that's the thing where I sort of decided, well, if they hate this and it's only worth it if they get a result that justifies it, then it's not going to work anyway. It's not going to make them happy anyway. And I don't want to be part of that. It's like, the journey has to be a valuable experience, because I don't want to be part of that sort of toxic, just punishing sort of style. So and I think essentially you train. I don't feel like you need to go so far into a ditch when you're doing heavy training that you have no clue whether you're in good shape or not. I feel like your training should be, indicative of how you're going. So if you're training, you try something new and it's just your forms, it's not doing anything it doesn't seem to be helping. I don't double down on it. I just just go, well, if it's making them drop in their results too much, then I don't think it's worth pursuing. It might not be, even if it's something you believe in, it might not be working for that athlete. So I think the results during training, the sort of control tests that you do, I don't really do testing much. I have things that you put in the training program that you kind of, that give you an indication of how they're going. I've got, a few things like that. We used to do heavy weeks and light weeks and stuff. These days, I just sort of, none of the weeks are that heavy, but I will see how they're going. When they're tired, I sort of give them a day off or 2 days off or something like that. You base it on, sometimes you got 2 weeks heavy and 1 week light, but what if you're knackered 1.5 weeks in and you've got to finish that week and it's not very worth doing, or you're not that tired and you've got to force them to have a break when they're not ready to have just all those sorts of things I started to think about, and just try and use logic really for everything, in the same way that I stopped programming reps so much in how many 40-meter sprints or how many 60-meter sprints are we going to do? It's like 8 or whatever. It's like, well, why 8? Why not 7? Why not 9? It's just a number that you're coming up with.
Mm.
And there's nothing really based on it. So to me, I sort of had my own measures with that. Like I wanted to do all their running should be a certain type of running, which was the form that a pole vaulter should run with. And I would just let them run if the distance they could. I would basically decide the longest they would go was as long as they could hold form. If they started falling out of, so it was 80 meters and they started falling out of form after that, I'd just do more reps at 80 meters sort of thing. And then I'd watch them, and if their form was good, I'd get them to keep going. When their form started to fail, that was probably when they were too tired. I'd stop that was enough sets.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing. Just trying to use nous a bit more rather than, because essentially it's you seem like you're planning really well if you put all these numbers in, but these plans never go how you want them anyway, because you never actually, I don't see anyone planning for a 2-week hammy niggle, in June or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So like it never actually goes to plan anyway. So you got to, it's good to have a guide and a guide there and a structure, but it's very movable based on how it's going.
With Kurtis, and let's say when he was running out the back, when you initially got him, like what did you see then in terms of how that had an effect on the actual event itself, or where he got to take off? Like what kind of effects were coming from that?
So he was essentially just not landing his takeoff step in a position to jump up. His knee was behind. He's got his foot out the back. So he needed to be front side. So he was basically just landing stacked with his form there in a position, standing tall, so that he's trying to jump higher. And I'm like, as long as you're landing in that position, the harder you try to jump higher, the more you're just going to like collapse through. So essentially, we need to fix the problem that's leading to that problem almost, and it was hard though, because it's not easy to change someone's habits. And that was one thing where I really was trying to cue toes up off the ground, toes up off the ground. And he for a long time he would say, I'm not going to think about that. That's not the like deciding factor of what's going on with my running or whatever. And I would keep pressing it. And at some point, it was actually Greg Duplantis. I was saying toes up, and then sent Greg a jump or something like that, and he sent it back to Kurt completely, and he was just like, "Go pull your toes up, Kurt," sort of thing. And so a couple of times you sort of get that, consolidation by another person that they respect, and they do need to hear it from another voice sometimes. There was a couple of things like that where Greg had given feedback to Kurt that was basically exactly what I'd been preaching, which were really handy for me to get Kurt to buy in. And then once he bought in, it was really after 2022 that he really bought in on that, and we really worked hard. And I said that this running mechanics thing to me is the priority, and I think he gave into it a bit and just started running better. He's still not perfect. It's still his tendency is to do that a little, but we're working on it and trying to improve it. And yeah, when he's jumping well, that's what's going well. And when he's not jumping well, that sort of seems to slip, I think. And he gets lazy with that a bit. And yeah, but it's really, that was a big key when he really focused on his running mechanics, trying to improve that. I felt like that his form changed dramatically quite quickly.
And so what were you seeing then? Like, let's say, like what would be the difference, let's say, when the pole is actually moving, when the athlete has backside mechanics and a plant that is kind of behind them versus,
Well,
again, someone who has that bigger kind of, it's in more neutral position, if you want to say.
yeah, well, they're essentially reaching and they're landing in front of themselves, their leg behind themselves. So they're jumping onto their last step and
Hmm.
planting late. And then a lot of the time you'll see them get like almost smack themselves and they'll take off and they just almost punch themselves in the head with the left hand.
Hmm.
And then it's such a sort of awful position to be in. You got to try and recover from that. Luckily, Kurtis is probably his technique. He's got the best recovery from a terrible position of all the vaulters in the world, I think, because he was so bad at it, and he developed a way of doing it. But um, it was really costing him. He was poles. He was not when he gets it right, um, he'll be 4 or 5 poles bigger, and essentially just getting the return of a much stiffer pole. Um, yeah, he's just leaking energy completely, and where as opposed when he jumps up into it, he's conserving energy, and it's just there's much less energy leakage.
Hmm. And he doesn't have to probably work as hard then, is that right? When,
Yeah, well,
doesn't
I
have to
think
muscle through the
people
takeoff.
talk about trying to stay strong with that left hand. Sorry, stay strong with that left hand all the time. But I sometimes think when you take off correctly, your body weight and everything just loads the pole better than you can with your left arm. And essentially, what happens when that's done well is the pole moves away from you, and you're almost having to hold on to it rather than push it away. And that's sort of that blocking problem that a lot of people have. That really, if you get that blocking style, it's really hard to swing from there, and people get
Mm,
stuck trying to get upside down. It becomes more of a muscle up rather than a swing.
mm,
Because you really want to tap down and up, and that's the other thing.
mm,
I think people need to think of it as a giant swing around, when to me it's a down up. It's like a hip circle, a handstand, not a giant swing.
yeah.
And so a lot of it, I think, running. I think of vertical cues. Trying to run vertical planting. I think don't try and plant forward or anything. Just plant straight up, and then
Mm,
tap and up. It's all up and down movements. You're just moving at velocity.
mm. Yeah, you're letting it take you versus like you trying to, I suppose, force it in a certain way.
Easier said than done.
Of
It's
course,
easy
yeah.
for me to say.
And so then with Nina, was it merely just getting the training on track and then her technical model was kind of in a good space, or were there any technical tweaks you had to kind of make to her as well?
So a little bit. So to me, she essentially when just worked on her speed came back just like that when we started doing more speed based training and less volume,
Mm,
and also just trying to get her you know consistent training where she wasn't having these injuries. Just trying to get you'd lower the training load by you know 20-30%, but to just get repeat weeks, week on week on week of training without interruption. She was vaulting. I tried to sort of clear her head from technique a lot. So to me,
mm,
she's such an instinct-based athlete, where she's a mongrel. Basically, she's just a powerhouse that just she's really instinctive. And I think she'd gone away from that a lot and was thinking a lot. And so to me, I often with her would just say, aim for the power pocket or aim for the sweet spot. And then she'd sort of do it, wouldn't get it. What happened there? I'd say, just try again. You missed it.
mm,
Go again. So I really tried to do that. It's hard for me though too, because you want to explain it. But I think sometimes you're doing that for yourself. You're trying to say some words to the athlete, then they go and do a jump that's better, and you like to think that was because I said the words that I said, when it's really probably just that they went again, and they can feel it they can feel when they do a jump, and they're like, oh, that wasn't right, but it was almost right. I nearly got it, and then they're trying to just they go again, and they're sort of working on it, and they're organizing themselves internally, and you know probably coaches are talking non-stop and thinking they're a genius, but essentially you just kind of um, sometimes I think it's about letting the athlete just, yeah, that was close, let's do that again, but aim for that no, aim for the line. I'd say it's almost like
mm,
aim for the gravity tube. Like you just try and aim through that gravity tube, and you just get shot through. And you know, yeah, just sometimes I would say things like, rather than say kick and then fold and then extend, I just say take off, and then I just want you to get to the extension position as early as possible, as quick as you possible.
mm,
And it's like, well, what do I do to get there? It's like, just get there. Your body will do it. Whatever
mm,
your body does, just get there. And it's funny how your body does work out how to do it
mm,
sometimes. So, I mean, it's everyone talks about follow the process and all this. Sometimes it's like, let's just talk about the outcome. Let's just see if you just ask you to aim for this outcome, your body sometimes goes through the process to get there.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
so, it's just, and again, that's another thing I'll try. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does. But, um, I do think, when you start getting results, it does give you start getting more comfortable being wrong because you're just like, well, I tried, it doesn't work. But when you're young and you're under pressure, sometimes that's a thing you feel that you have to know everything, and you don't want to say, oh, I don't know why that didn't work or whatever. You just always feel, and it's. I think you got to give people permission. Give them an off ramp and give them a. If you try this, try something. You're welcome to try it. If it doesn't work though, and you say, oh, that didn't work, you don't want to sit there going, I see, I told you so. I told you. Sort of, you got to let them off the hook.
Mm.
Um, but when you get confidence as in your own self, you don't care anyway because you know that you're sort of generally you know what you're doing, but you just always have to keep looking for new things and trialing and erroring.
Mm. Yeah, pole vault with especially like the technical aspects of it, like there has to be a lot of trial and error, and you have to probably be comfortable in making mistakes to find your resolution. Like same with, I mean, long jump and triple jump is
Yeah,
different
definitely,
because it
and
probably
different
doesn't have as many
athletes.
components, but
Just
at the same time, you go if I reflect on a session that I have with an athlete, you are going through a process each and every day of, you know, tweaking things and playing with language and
yeah,
ultimately, yeah, the one that
yeah,
the resolution they come up with themselves is
yeah,
the best one because it sticks, doesn't it?
yeah. And to me, you say it's not as technical. It's not true. Actually, every event, like you think of discus and javelin stuff. To me, they're way more. And people talk about just because there's a lot of things happening. Really, people are just trying to swing and turn, and that's
Mm,
essentially. It's not as there's triple jump. There's so much you have to get right as well. I
true.
mean, in every event, to be honest, at the top level, you have to be. There's very very small margins.
Mm,
So to me, I don't actually believe that pole vault is the most technical event. I think all track and field events, generally, especially the throws and the jumps. There's plenty, and athletes of all those events can get the yips. You know,
oh yeah, definitely. Perfect. Yeah, no, what I was going to ask you next is really like to do with, I suppose, pole selection and the competitions and in training, like what kind of factors for consideration? And this is a very, very, like, I suppose, to pole vault experts, a rudimentary question, but like, what are the kind of considerations where you need to kind of guide an athlete to say, no, it's time to go up a pole or whatnot?
well, I think a lot of the problems for me, from my point of view, come from training and trying to make them do all these things that are really on the edge. So you put someone to a pole that's like the biggest pole they've used, or they have to do everything perfect to get it right. Sometimes I think that then leads to them tightening up and starting to fail.
Hmm.
Generally, I think in training, I don't feel the need necessarily. I feel I like to put them on a pole that they're pretty comfortable with to start with, at least. That
Hmm.
they're not feeling anxiety with, and it's sort of they can actually focus and work the shape of the run and the vault, and it's pretty low anxiety. And they
Hmm.
just got the stands deep, and they're just blowing through and getting good timing. And you're
Hmm.
working your groove pattern. So to me, and then only move up pole generally if they really need to. Um, and to me, repeat training and good habits like that. If you do lots of run throughs in training, if you can do a session, 4 weeks of sessions twice a week where you do 10, let's say 10 or 15 jumps a session, no run throughs because you're putting yourself in a comfortable position, then run throughs are not an option for you that you're worrying about when you're at comp.
Mm.
And I think, in comp, the adrenaline and stuff takes care of all the other factors. If you're in training, you start running through, you're taking off twice, you're starting at the start of the runway and you can see in their head, they're just going, oh, I don't want to run through. It's like saying, don't look here, don't look here. I just think that it's like say people take train in bad conditions and stuff. I actually don't believe that. I think train in stable conditions, get the groove pattern really locked in and repeated, and then when you are put into challenging situations, you've got your habit is to do the pattern that your habit is a good one.
Mm.
That's my opinion generally. I like you know just repeating the good timing jumps is is what I will tend to do in training. And then, but then again, with all of them, sometimes you get people wanting to try and jump high in training, and you got to let them have a bit of fun too. So there's a balance with all of it. And generally in comp, I would start the warm up, just work yourself to a pole that you're going to clear the opening bar quite comfortably with. And all warm up is working out what pole and run you need. This is my opinion.
Hmm.
Working out the pole that you need to clear the opening bar. Um, Probably start with your stands deep and what your run up needs to be, and then stop. I sort of find it like wild that you see people just coming and they do amazing jump over 560 or something in the warm up, and then they do another five jumps, and they're usually average jumps as well after doing this amazing jump. And it's like I think once you've worked out what pole you need, why don't you just sit down? Because generally I feel like comp and jumping well in warm up or badly in warm up is I find it's very non-indicative of how the comp's going to go. It's almost like you can have a terrible warm up and comp might go brilliantly. It's almost like you got to reset, and you got to be careful both ways. If you have a great warm up, then you got to really, make sure you don't get too comfortable because it might not be the same.
Mm.
Yeah. But yeah, just especially in the early comps, you work it out in comp. If you stuff it up, a couple of times, that's not the end of the world. And try to allow people room for error and encourage the right things. But again, in comp, I I feel like sometimes it's about being able to get a foot under at takeoff and then just grinding through it and finishing the jump and clearing the bar, and you keep yourself in the comp and you can try and fix off the next height. You know, People get really precious, and if they're just a slight bit under, they don't even finish the jump because they want it to be perfect.
Mm.
And you're saying, well, you're missing an opportunity to stay in the comp though.
Hmm. Hmm.
So again, I try to look. I've got heaps of my own dogma, like everyone. But I try to sort of catch myself out with that and have make sure I'm not sort of getting caught up in one metric that sort of means something to me that actually isn't helping sometimes.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're trying to first and foremost ensure that they're kind of able to jump from any almost position or any error, and that's something you've
You'd like
enforced
it
in
to
training.
you'd like them to be broad, have a broad range of how they can finish jumps. Don't want it to be, this perfect jump. Keep aiming for that, but don't be sort of married to it.
Hmm. And with the pole selection, like, did you have Nina and let's say Curtis go off different brands of poles or different types of poles? Did they have a
Um,
preference, and
they
why was
do go.
that if they did?
They're on the same brand. They're both on spirits, but I don't mind. It's just to me, whatever. I don't really have you know, I think, like I'd say, Spirited tend to be what a lot of athletes seem to find the most usable. That sort of works for a lot. But then Essex seem to some people really like them the way they feel. People try them and don't like them. I think they're all pretty close. If you jump on one and get used to one, it's not going to be the end of the world. But really, it's consistency throughout the season, consistency for them again. So to me, I write down what their grip, their run up, their mid mark, their takeoff, their
Hmm.
bar, the stands, and all this and all that stuff. Not. I think I sometimes do it for my own OCD to kind of keep myself busy in
Hmm.
training sessions and in comps, but um, it does give me a lot of data to sort of know what they typically use for typical heights and all that sort of stuff. And you do just sort of start to know the athlete really, really well. And sometimes I think your job as a coach as well is to know the athlete better than they know themselves. because I think, and it's the same with me. And if I'm under pressure and something that I'm going through, I'm much better at handling other people's crises than my own. Like if it's
Hmm.
my own, and as a coach, even though it's my crisis as well, I think I'm able to kind of when there's someone else on, someone else's sort of career on the line, I feel that I'm not able to, I just don't have the luxury of losing my cool because someone else is involved. I'm happy to sabotage myself, but
Mm.
not someone else.
Hmm. And yeah, going into that a bit more, like I noticed that, you were on a podcast the other day, which was really good as well. And that you were talking about kind of how Kurtis moves through certain bars in competition and the kind of heights that they're at, or the lengths, I should say. Um, I'm gathering that like a lot of the, I suppose, physical or anthropometric characteristics kind of dictate those types of measurements, so to speak, because yeah, some people will not necessarily know what considerations guide you towards dictating those polls. But
Yeah,
for those,
but you also, because to me, I'm not that. I really don't want to be checking their weight every day and all that sort of thing
mm,
either. I sort of think that well, it is useful to know, just it's a bit. I just don't want to go down that path with anyone really, where it's
mm-hmm,
sort of that becomes the main thing. And I do think that it might be that different poles are working on different days and their weight might be slightly different, but it shouldn't be too far away,
mm,
and you should be able to make those adjustments on the day based on how they seem to be going. And Kurtis, Nina was very. I felt like we were very. She became clinical. Very clinical. Repeated, same sort of mid mark, same sort of takeoff, but same sort of
mm-hmm,
poles would clear things. And she was just yeah, just deadly in how she was, especially last year. It was
mm-hmm,
really a clinic and just you know lethal. Like she was just, I felt like she was just almost unbeatable last year. But Kurtis, sometimes we've got a mid mark that he usually is, and some comps will get there, and he's sort of mid mark might be 1770 mostly or something like that, and he's chopping them. Then at World Champs in Budapest, his mid mark's out at 1830, and he's going, I need to get my mid mark in. And I'm like, look, but you're jumping well, let's just go with it. Like, whatever it is, don't know why, but it's working today, and I'm not going to, like, not get stubborn over it and not try and work out why and sort of analyze it and try and fix it today. It's just make good, and you can. What I've found with Kurtis is he can do it a lot of different ways, and we have gotten really good at just being prepared for whatever comes our way on the comp day, and I really enjoy that challenge too.
mm,
And sometimes Kurt will get sort of stuck, and I have to kind of you know use my tricks to try and get him to sort of believe in himself a bit more, because he can go down rabbit holes or get frustrated, and I'll have to get him out of that and get him to sort of be open to different things. But yeah, I enjoy that challenge, and I feel like in the moment that if you're a good coach, you should be able to make these adjustments and work it out. And Mondo's like that. You see, Mondo can be fairly different, but it's just he is so brilliant. He can make micro adjustments within the run up to correct it if he's 2 feet out at his mid. You
mm-hmm.
know, he's really got such an amazing feel.
With the, I suppose, more developed athletes, this may not be such a feature of your training, but maybe for, because they're such different cases, Kurtis and Nina, like how much did the gymnastic strength kind of play a role in their later development, if at all?
So Nina was a good gymnast. So I used to make her do gymnastics, and at some point we'd go there and she would just, it was so beneath her. And so the gymnastics that she needed for pole vault was just, she had it, way well beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Kurtis still needed a little bit. So it just depends on different people. And
Mm-hmm.
that was another opportunity for me to let Nina have a bit more, this is a good chance for you to have a rest day or whatever.
Hmm.
but Kurtis, I needed to do a bit of that because he needed some
Hmm.
of those skills. And Kurt's sort of sometimes like posture, he couldn't really open his shoulders and open his chest very
Mm.
well. So we kind of, you know, those things we're working on. But what I'd prefer to do with gymnastics really is just have some gymnastics equipment around and do bits and pieces, at the end of a session, rather than once a week go for 2 hours or whatever. I'm almost like you need a bit of do it 3 times a week for like 15 minutes, sort of just on
Mm.
a bar or whatever. I think you get more, you know, continuity. That's generally, but yeah, again, it's all just based on if I see someone in their jump that they don't have a good tap or something, then I'll sort of go, okay, let's go over to the high bar and
Mm.
and I'll show you what an exercise that I think you've got to think of when you're doing that. And um, yeah, it's just again sometimes it's a bit simplistic, but really the one thing that describes how I like to coach is just balance. Balance with everything. You want the jump to be balanced. You want their technique to be balanced. You want their life to be balanced. You want their modalities of training to be the right balance. And it's the only thing you've got to do is just as long as you get it perfect, everything's going to be okay.
Mm.
So that's the trick. You just got to get the right balance for each person, and
Hmm.
that's a constant. You got to constantly keep recalibrating.
Hmm. And I suppose doing the gymnastics so closely after technical sessions nearly takes the
Mm,
language out of it for you in that like it's not
yeah,
you just prescribing verbally another thing, but rather getting them to feel it themselves nearly.
yeah. Again, and it's also just taking a whole, like, having to go to a gymnastics hall and do a whole,
Hmm.
doing a whole session when you can just, it's like I use warm up drills and stuff is basically part of warm up. I use the drills, but I think the running drills and dribbling and all that sort of stuff is sort of sometimes the most, effective thing to help their running mechanics. Because when they run, I just sort of want them to run.
Hmm.
I want they do their drills and try and work on their patterns and stuff there. When I don't want them thinking so much when they're doing the actual sort of full version of things.
Hmm.
So hopefully that stuff transfers. Mm.
With the technical work, do you again, and you probably have answered this already in a sense that do you kind of prescribe that based on need as well, where, for example, Kurtis, needed a lot of that technical reinforcement, or the opposite, rather, he needed a lot more running emphasis in his program when you
Yeah,
initially got to him. So therefore that's what took precedence and the technical work took a back
yeah.
seat, so to speak, until that got right.
Well, it was probably technical work in running
Yeah,
that
yeah,
he
sure.
needed. It needed a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of, and yeah. I mean, uh, and with technical stuff with general volters, you can really just there's some simple exercises you could stick to. If you could just teach people how to do a stiff pole takeoff where they ride behind the pole, and then a stiff pole kick and swing where they get like the pop up or whatever, and they're pulling all the way to the mat, sort of thing, and holding that body tension. Those kinds of things, if you just did that and then sort of gradually gripped up until the pole started bending a little bit. That's really those sorts of and dribbling and calf dribbling and ankle dribbling and you're sort of skipping A's or whatever, keeping your toes up and trying to really focus on the ground contacts. You don't have to do a whole bunch of different things. You could almost stick to a couple of these exercises, focus on them, and they'll help you quite a lot. And
Mm.
yeah, to me, so I don't really have. Generally, I'm asking most people for the same kind of running mechanics. Whether it looks different, how it comes out probably, but essentially, I want them to have that, front side sprinter sort of thing. Don't, I don't program any jogging into their programs or even sort of slow running. Sort of every like they run at a tempo level that their mechanics can still look like the sort of way you run. It's almost like the way that the slowest they run is the build up to the mid mark sort of tempo.
Would you like me to use ChatGPT to
Sorry, man. Yeah,
All good, all good.
I take probably 4,000 screenshots a day just by fiddling with my phone, and I call about 10 people a day. without knowing.
All good, all good. Yeah, no, that is, it makes a lot of sense because you're essentially gelling the component parts there together to create the full thing as you want it to happen, but you're kind of micro influencing it for that person,
Yeah,
hoping that it will transfer essentially into the
and
full.
I'll give people different warm ups to kind of suit what they need and stuff. But
Hmm.
a lot of the time, I'm not, some guru at running mechanics. So I sort of get other people to check and say, what do you think?
Hmm.
How do what do you think of this running? And, what drills do you think I could do? Um, so yeah, I sort of don't claim to be the running, sprint mechanics sort of sensei.
Hmm. You did mention though that Greg, is offered you some advice with, Kurtis and stuff like that. Is there anything in particular you've learned from, collaborating with other coaches in the
Yeah,
circuit? Because one thing I can see from the athletes is that there's a seriously good community within the pole vault scene, and I wonder, is
yeah,
it is the same in the coaching sphere, as you compete
yeah.
alongside each other?
Yeah, I really like the coaches that I coach alongside, especially Greg and Helena. Helena's really, really clever with her. She does a lot of the programming
Hmm.
for Mondo for conditioning and stuff. But yeah, Greg is I love the way he thinks, and him and I think, usually agree on what we see, and it comes out a little different sometimes. But
Hmm.
he's got a really clever way of. He sort of says, I don't really think of it as technique. I think of it as just energy that you're trying to just store and apply, and and hold in the right spots. And that's the way I see Mondo almost. You see the way he jumps; it's almost like he's just making tiny little, fine little movements just to keep himself perfectly sort of his center mass basically lined up on the as heavy as he can on the pole, and then he just gets to a position where it's just he's just a passenger.
Hmm.
He's just, and it's so because he's so balanced and in the right positions, it all happens quite easily, and that's the way it feels when you do a good vault. When you take off and you're in a good position at takeoff, it's almost like the swing is the where your body wants to go, and you
Hmm.
sort of just kind of allowing it to go there. And when you take off, when you're not balanced and you're trying to get upside down, it just feels like a force field. You can't beat the pole. The
Hmm.
pole's moving away from you as you're trying to get to it. And people say, try and get upside down, try and get upside down. Well, I just don't. It's not possible at that point because they've they've blown it a couple of steps earlier.
Hmm.
But yeah, just the way, I love talking to Greg about Vault, and I love having him come give Kurtis some pointers because yeah, it usually just reinforces some of the things I'll be telling Kurt. Sometimes I can tell with Kurt that I'm telling him something and he's nodding at me, but I'm like, I'll say to him, you're not listening to me, are you? She's like, yeah, yeah, sure, man, yeah, I'll think, yeah, I'll do that. And I'm like, well, they'll come to me a few weeks later and say, hey, why didn't you tell me to do this? I need to do this. It's a big joke that luckily both, we've got things that we use against each other where we're both pretty, we both got our quirks that are pretty outrageous.
Yeah, it's
So
a
we can
good,
make fun of each other.
yeah, good sign of a bond for sure.
Mm.
The running mechanics you'd mentioned with Curtis, another thing that I heard you say is that, taking him to 590 towards Budapest was somewhat based on his speed as well. Like, kind of,
Yeah.
I suppose, yeah. How did
So
you begin to exploit that a little bit more and get that to where it needed to be to jump as high as he did?
yeah, so I think as well, part of it we didn't really realize. So he's so tall. He was actually carrying a bit of weight,
Hmm.
in 2022, and I think he just really focused on his diet. We got him in good physical shape, did good training, worked on these sprint mechanics, which essentially that combined with being in better shape, just essentially he really had a decent, significant improvement in his speed on the runway. Not only speed on the runway, but that combined with being balanced and in a position to exploit it,
Hmm.
um, really just made him go from sort of a sort of 60, 70 volter that would occasionally fluke a 580
Hmm.
to sort of 580 on lock, getting some 590s and 595s. And that's a massive difference at that point. I think,
Hmm.
the sort of might only sound like 10 centimeters, but if you're the difference between 580 and 590 is huge, you know, and especially if you're just consistently hitting 580s, and then it's putting yourself in a position to sort of go further. So that's what we're trying to do with 6 meters at the moment. We've had a few good shots at it. We're peppering it, giving himself best a good opportunity to do it, and we should hurry up and do it. I keep saying to him, dude, you should clear 6 meters. It's so amazing. You don't know what it's like. It's really different. It's really different.
Yeah, I'm sure that's taking him on. But on that note, like, what do you think is going to need to happen in order for him to do that? Because yeah, he's agonizingly close now, and I
Yeah,
suppose the speed has been something that's taken him there. What do you think is going to be like, I suppose, the icing on the cake to put it together?
consistency, repeat, high jumps, consistency, and just a bit of luck. You know, I think, and just continue to kind of keep working on the things we're working on. He's not doing it. All the things we've worked on. He's improved. He's not perfect,
Hmm.
and he probably never will be. He's with his makeup. He's a body type. It's not easy for him to run perfectly front side and all that sort of stuff. But he's just still trying to work on all the same things, and keep jumping high and putting himself in a position to have a go at it. I don't think we need to break anything down and try and reinvent anything. I've seen a lot of people make that mistake
Mm.
before, where they're nearly jumping something massive and then they haven't jumped it a few times, so they go, "Oh, we need to try to do something different," and then they just blow the whole thing. So
Hmm.
just there's not a magic potion or anything. It's just good, solid training, consistent training, all at the things you need to get better at, and just be patient and don't get disheartened, because that's the other thing. When you start getting frustrated and then you start trying to jump in desperation, it's
Mm.
just I always say to him, if you're missing 6 meters, if you're jumping 580s all the time, and it's a good thing to be frustrated at jumping 580. So just keep putting yourself in a position. Don't get affected by missing, and it's sort of part of the process.
Mm.
Accept that you're going to have really then sort of frustratingly close misses that you're going to, and just keep going. Just keep
Mm.
doing it, and you'll get it one day.
Suppose it does come back to what you were originally saying. It reinforces that mindset of not trying to be perfect and being
Yeah,
first and foremost nearly a competitor.
acceptance as
And
well. I think
yeah,
acceptance,
yeah.
and so you can drive yourself crazy if oh, I should have cleared that. My elbow hit it on the way, and I should have cleared it.
Mm.
Well, but you didn't. So just keep
Mm.
going and clear it next time, and
Hmm.
just keep putting yourself in a position. And you know, all those things happen to everyone.
Mm. Yeah, it's a reminder. I think athletes do forget. They get so kind of consumed by their own experience that they
Yeah,
think that everyone's
they
not
think the
going
world's
through that.
against them
Just
or something like that.
yeah.
But Kurtis is very good at that, I'll say.
Mm. Yeah, so I suppose recently he's been in great form, 590 in
Yep,
Stockholm, if I'm not mistaken.
yep,
Um, and after last year, I know he had a bit of an injury kind of that did lead him to performing very well at the Olympics.
yeah, yeah.
That
It's a
was more of a
terrible
freak
injury.
accident, though. There wasn't much you could do in terms of transitioning into this year. It was more just keep repeating the process, stay healthy, and
Yeah.
see what
So
happens nearly.
just the terrible, terrible injury last year that I think it really, most people, I don't think, it, it really shouldn't have been that he could compete, really. We just sort of just kept trying to do the best we could, and just, didn't let ourselves, you know, um, get affected and start thinking we couldn't jump anything. We just kept our minds open, and he said to me after the Olympics, he said, "No one will ever know what we had to go through, but you and me, to get
Hmm.
here." And so to me, that's one of the proudest moments of my coaching career, is his result of the Olympics last year, to put himself in that sixth place, and he was jumping for a medal, which is, with what the injury that he had was really, really, really horrific. And but one thing he said to me at that time, he said to me, when he was in at home, and he had nurses coming, dressing his wound and all that sort of stuff. He didn't get down. He just said to me, let's not even talk about whether I can get a medal. Let's not talk about whether I can make the final or even get to the start line. Let's just do the best we can every day and just put this down as another chapter in our story. And it just blew me away that he sort of looked at it like that. And it actually just cleared things up. And I thought, that's just, yeah, this just adds more grit. And then we got our redemption story, and it's just more grit to our story, and it sort of makes the story better. So either way, we can't lose as long as we keep staying true to ourselves and staying true to each other and doing the best we can. Giving it everything. It's a great sort of way to be. And as a coach and athlete, where you sort of feel like, whatever we do, we succeed, but we succeed together. But if we fail together, and it makes it like a bit easier when you sort of got a brother in arms sort of thing, and that's how we feel like we're fighting back and fighting for to get back for the redemption after a terrible injury, but all the time it's sort of always like we're doing our best, and we're sort of on this mission to sort of just give it our best shot, and wherever we finish, we're really proud of it. We love seeing the other guys do well. We don't have any sort of beef with anyone, and we never sort of wish that other people don't jump badly. It's like we just want to do the best we can and see where it finishes. If we jump 6 meters and we finish outside the medals, we haven't failed.
The beauty I think about a lot of the older athletes is they start to come to the realization that the medals are great and the accolades are great, but ultimately I think the stories that they kind of come with are really what they hold on to.
It's the friends you make, it's the people you meet, it's the sort of the lessons you learn, and to me, I feel like we're doing something pretty good, and I feel like we're doing it in a great way where there's no manipulation, there's no sort of like fuckery, whatever. We sort of really just both honest and staying true to ourselves and authentic. I try to stay altruistic, and you try and think, I want to make sure that what you're doing the best for the athlete, even if it's not necessarily the best thing by you. You really have to. I try, and that's my sort of calibration tool, I guess, is just trying to think, okay, I need to be confident that this is the best thing for Kurtis. Or Nina, when I was coaching Nina, it was the same. And then, that sort of is not always easy because there's temptations. But to me, if I make that my measure, then I can't go too far wrong.
No, definitely not. No, that is a great way to say it.
And I'll say to them, look, I can't say that I'm not going to fuck up, but I can tell you that I'm going to try and do what I believe is right for you. I might be wrong at times, but I will promise that I'll do what I believe is the best thing for you.
I'd imagine that leaves them in a place where they always kind of know where you're coming from, and that in itself yields a lot of trust when you again back to what you said, like you're going through it together. Fundamentally,
we're learning together too. It's good when you kind of get out of a comp, and I just have no problem saying to him, look, I made the wrong call there. I made the wrong call here. I should have done this. I think in hindsight, doing this, I don't have any hesitation. I think there is times where you're sort of worried about how the athlete will view you. That you don't want to say it's. This is what I think we all got to try and give each other a break, and try and everyone you work with in any capacity, try and allow them to have that, room to be honest, and stay, to do the right thing by you essentially. Because if you don't give them any room, then they're sort of forced into that position.
Were there any experiences, let's say, for you as a coach when maybe you did make a mistake that were really important to, I suppose, yielding a better outcome for the next one? I found that
probably. There's probably too many to talk to, and I'll admit it to them. I don't want to admit it to you guys. I felt like as a team we made some wrong calls and stuff like that, and I was sort of trying to when you get a good result, everyone wants to say you must have got the preparation perfect, but it's not necessarily
Mm,
true. And when you get a bad
mm,
result, that doesn't mean you got
mm,
the preparation wrong.
mm.
But it's the way it's seen.
Yeah, that's
Mm.
that's so true. I
You
think the
just still got
greatest
to
part
try and
of
analyze the preparation and the decisions you made on their own merits.
mm, yeah, I think between coaches, it's interesting because you are rated on your outputs, and of course that's what the sport is. But in
Yeah,
reality, there's so much more gray area on
I
both
think
sides, whether it was successful or not.
I think there's ways you can look at things and work out and just go, "This is the decision you made. It didn't come off, but was the decision sound?"
Mm,
I think sometimes I feel like you didn't get the outcome, but I feel really comfortable that I made the best choice you could have made in that
mm,
moment, and
yeah,
that's what I think you got to try and look at. But no one wants to. When you jump well, this is no one's wanting to give you feedback.
mm,
When you jump poorly, everyone will though, and
hmm,
essentially it's hard to defend yourself, even if you
hmm,
feel that you have got things more right than they'll give credit for. It really just gives them an excuse. This is the tough thing with coaching, but that's also the thing you do it for. Is I feel like as a coach, that's what I'm prepared to do. As long as I'm sort of allowed to sort of be in a position to make the decisions, I'm willing to wear the criticism. Because I do feel quite confident that I'm going to make mostly good calls, and it's not a complete guess. I think I'm getting good to a point where I feel like I'm making calls where I'm giving myself a good chance, and there's nothing's definite. You can always make bad calls or calls that don't turn out well, but you do feel at some point that you start to have a good read on things, especially with an athlete you've been working with for a while.
mm. Yeah, you've accumulated those data points, and there are patterns and themes that you're drawing upon to make that call. And sometimes you get presented with new information that kind of says, "Well, you didn't consider this," but you didn't know what you didn't know really at that point in
Yeah,
time.
um, yeah, I agree, and sometimes you just have a run of bad luck too, and that'll shake your confidence. It can't not, I don't think. And it's like I don't know what the answer is with that because it's like I guess a cricketer who's might be batting brilliantly and then they get out 3 times in a row to brilliant
Hmm.
balls, or whatever, and you just then all of a sudden they're in bad form,
Hmm.
when they're probably not,
Hmm.
or I don't know. I mean, just some things like that. Coaching is a bit like that. It's not all. You don't have complete control either.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah, I saw a quote from a sports psychologist the other day. It was like two things can be true in sports
Yeah.
performance is that you're going to have great competitions when you're in great shape, and you're going to have great competitions when you're in terrible shape. And the opposite, you're going to have bad competitions when you're in
Yeah.
great shape, and you're going to have great competitions when you're in bad shape.
Well,
And I thought, wow, that captures the experience very,
yeah,
very well.
I saw a quote by Barack Obama or something sometime when he was talking about the decisions that he was always faced with, and they were always basically, if they got to him, they were just basically the terrible decisions that were terrible either way. It was what was less terrible, and it's like trying to measure these, fine line between which decision to make. How many people are going to die if we do this? How many people are going to die? The less die if we do this, and it's like at that
Mm,
level, coaching's. Uh, yeah, it's just like that. No, it's not.
mm,
But like again, it feels like the stakes are high.
mm,
But I thought that was a really great example of it at an extreme level.
mm,
And that's what it feels. It does feel like sometimes it feels
mm,
like it's all on you, and you've got to try and make the right call, and you've got to have the sort of like self confidence to just go. If it goes wrong, I can take it.
mm-hmm,
You know, and to me, that's something I'm prepared as a coach. I feel like that's part of the job. You do sometimes have to take it when you might not really feel like you deserve it, but that's part of
mm,
the job.
mm,
And you got to be able to take that pressure too in that heat.
mm. With the last few years have been really, really good with pole vault, and it's at a standard that it probably has never been at. I'm certainly at the top level with Mondo setting world records, but
Yeah,
even at the depth,
men's is amazing. Men's is
yeah, yeah.
phenomenal.
So it's people are at 6 meters like they've never been before, and it,
Hmm.
it seems like there's always someone coming through and doing it next. And obviously, Kurtis is one of those
Yeah.
people. But I'm interested to know, given that that's happening, do you see any kind of evolution within the event and it's obviously it is an
I
evolution
guess
event,
it's
but what would
happened.
you maybe attribute it to?
I think one thing is when someone's jumping 6:28, six
Hmm.
meters doesn't have the same stigma as it
Mm.
used to. I mean, to me, I think break new ground is an amazing thing. I think, and to think Curtis is jumping 590, which I think the people need to make no mistake, 590 is huge,
Mm.
but he's jumping 590. He came second, but he only lost by 38 centimeters, which to us it's an honor to be part of this Mondo era, and it's like we're part of history and we're involved in it and we're there and we're sort of seeing it happen. And same with Manolo's looking brilliant, and yeah, it's just and that's what we see it as. Kurt got a medal with 595 first attempt. He's medaled in the greatest era of men's pole vault. It may recalibrate. It may be sort of there for good. Pole
Mm.
vault would always tend to go up and look like it was going to just go, and then it would sort of come back and sort of settle. But I don't know. It might just be the new. I think I don't know what it is. I don't think
Mm.
you know. I don't know. I just think it must be that people are going for 6 meters without the hang up as
Hmm.
much.
Hmm. Because like Mondo probably, because I'm going to say this because I'm not an expert, is
Hmm.
probably the fastest jumper that's existed in pole vault.
Yeah, I think
For
pretty safe bet.
yeah, I'd imagine so. And so
That's
has
what
that.
it's showing is that you know that speed. You can call it what you want, but speed is a real advantage. But the thing he's got is he's got all the other elements because we've
Hmm.
had fast vultures before, like nearly as
Hmm.
fast probably. That just
Hmm.
there's a lot that you got to do. Mondo seems to have all the elements. Just it's almost like the matrix of things that you need to be. Just
Hmm.
happens to have all of them.
Hmm.
Feel, courage. Sort of he's amazingly sort of low anxiety. You know, um, but it's great because he's so accessible and he's so you know such a breath of fresh air because he's great fun, great having a laugh with. He hangs out, he mucks around, he parties, and it's it's really it's really great to be part of to see
Hmm.
this whole I feel like we're in the midst of history.
Hmm. So it's not so much like a puzzle to be solved, like the I suppose
Yeah,
evidence is pretty clear and people aren't really trying to copy it, but rather just riding the wave of the energy coming
well,
from the event itself nearly. Is that what you're
yeah, and I mean I think that
saying?
there's things Mondo does the way he puts his whole vault together is to me it's unbelievably good technique, right? But people might say there's things he does that you don't. I wouldn't teach people necessarily
Okay.
because if you do that, like say, put the pole on the track before it goes into the box, like he does, I just think the way he's um, worked out his whole balance of his running and all that, everything, it all sort of seems to work together, and there's a whole combination. I don't know, and I would never be able to work that out, that matrix.
Mm.
I don't even want to sometimes. People talk about the data. You can look at data. There was one thing I saw where it was talking about people with high takeoffs and far takeoffs and low takeoffs
Mm.
and close take, and it was like basically it came up with the outcome was that people can there's no pattern,
Mm.
and I was like, yeah, like it's like what's the slowest you could be to jump 6 meters? It's like, well, who's the slowest person to jump 6 meters? That until someone slower does it.
Mm.
you know
Hmm.
um so who knows, and who cares? Just I think what I like to try and do is get an athlete that I'm working with and try and just make the most of what they've got, and I think that I'm pretty good at that. And all those you can get some of those stats and it's great, and you want them I do use stats, but all those trying to work out why, I think I've never found anything that really. I've seen somehow they're trying to say that Mondo's jump is not efficient or something, and I'm like, well, it's pretty efficient to me.
Mm.
You know, um, so I don't know. I mean, they're looking at all sorts of different velocity curves and stuff. And yeah, to be honest, when they're talking about that, it just goes to circus music in my head.
It's hard to argue with world record after world record, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think not the top guys aren't thinking that hard about all these things that people are looking for.
Hmm.
I don't know.
You're
Maybe I'm wrong though. I'm wrong. That's probably just a cop out because I don't want to have to look at spreadsheets.
Yeah, no. Well, look, you make a good argument there for the fact that like there's different ways of doing it, and we're constantly getting proven that. So it's
Yeah,
hard to then underpin one style and one way
yeah,
to being the secret ingredient when there's
yeah.
so much variance.
Well, I every time I think I've got something worked out, I prove myself wrong by
Hmm.
the next person I try it with. It won't work. Everything's so individual to the athlete you're working with. And then it's almost individual to the day you're working with that athlete as well.
Hmm.
I mean, you just got to keep trying to work it out and keep understanding that you have never got it all solved, and you just got to, you know, um, keep recalibrating and keep trying to get better and keep having more tools in your toolkit to try and use to help people. And as you get more experience, I do think you just get better at it, um, and get there in less steps, maybe, or
Mm.
But yeah, it's all great fun.
Recently, I know that you've parted ways with, your appointment in Athletics Australia, or more
Mm,
specifically, you were based in Perth with
yep,
their Institute of Sport. So
yep,
you're now consulting abroad and
yep,
everywhere in between. So yeah, just if you want to maybe talk through your
yeah.
situation at the minute, and
Well,
and also, what you've got coming up, really, what projects you're working on,
yeah. So
collaborative
just
partnerships and all that.
yeah, just kind of things came to a head with myself and my employer. Just had difference in opinion on things, and we sort of separated. And um, I was working for Athletics Australia after that for a while, and then
Hmm.
after the end of last year, I just essentially started working with Kurtis, uh, and doing some consulting. I'm doing a little bit of look at me doing this again. I'm doing a little bit of work with Karen Lott's athletes, which is includes Katie Moon, which has
Hmm.
been great. She's been fantastic, and I get to work with her coach Brad Walker, who was one of my great friends and great competitors back in the day. So that's amazing to get that opportunity. And I'm doing working with a Chinese boy, Tao, um, and yeah, so doing a bit of consulting, and yeah, that's been great. Still trying to work out exactly how what my future looks like or whatever. But yeah, looking to do it a little differently moving forward. Doing some pole vault workshops and stuff. I'm going to Japan in August to do a workshop in Tokyo on the way back to Europe before going back to Japan for the World Champs. And yeah, I'm looking really interested in doing things like that, and maybe some speaking. It's not my speaking is not sort of I'm not Johnny Cochran or anything. I'm not perfectly well spoken, but I try and sort of tell the rough around the edges story of my journey and the ups and downs. And I've certainly had plenty of downs, and I think as well as ups. But really, I feel like the biggest lessons I've learned, and the biggest gain, the most valuable lessons I've learned have come from a lot of my failures. And um, so yeah, I don't I have had some success, and I do have like to talk about that. But really, the real fiber comes from the hard times, I think. So,
Mm.
yeah, just love pole vault, love coaching, and yeah, I plan to keep working in this field one way or another. And
How
yeah,
might
I've got, if you want, you can. I've got just pole vault hub is my Instagram that I sort of post pole vault stuff on, and you can message me or anything if you want to, or P Burgess 600@outlook.com is my email.
Yeah, it'd be great for the listeners to get in touch, definitely, because I know there's going to be there's I've had many guests on this podcast, and I know for sure they've been they've been messaged and had all sorts of inquiries from the listeners on. So it's always great when someone's willing to, offer up their services. And I
Yeah,
know now is an important time for you to expand
yeah,
that
and
reach and knowledge that you have.
probably I tend to want to work with people. Like I really like to work with certain types of people that I click with on a
Mm,
sort of spiritual level or whatever. I'm not a spiritual person, but like on a someone I click with on values, and I like to work for good people and help good people. And yeah, generally I just like I don't plan to just you know take anyone and just work with whoever I can get and just take money and run or whatever. I really
hmm
do feel like I struggle to even pretend if I don't feel um, passionate about the person or trying to achieve something. Those are the things that's how I sort of operate. I struggle to work with people I don't like.
hmm
So you know, yeah, I'm just looking for good people and wanna help people. Love vault, love pole vault.
Well, Paul, do appreciate the last hour and a half. It's been lovely chatting to you and listening to all the wisdom that you've kind of accumulated over the time of working with your vaulters, the best in the world. Like, it's important. I probably should open with that. Is that that's where you're at, and there's a reason for that. So I would implore, the listeners out there to utilize your expertise. And yeah, thank you for the time, and
Thank
it's
you,
been really
mate.
fun.
Sorry to I do tend to just I can talk to a brick wall, so sorry for chewing everyone's ear off, but yeah, I had a great time. So that was a really good interview. Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. And I will say that anyone who listens to this is probably of the mindset that they like, nerding out on all the technical details. So we don't really see it as punishment or anything like that. It's something that's very much a leisure for many of us, and I've really have enjoyed it myself. So thank
Oh,
you.
thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.